Hello, everybody.
Hi.
My name is Ciri.
Hi, Ciri.
I am a disciple of Jesus Christ who has had victory over suicidal depression. And watching that video, I realized that celebrate recovery is for all of us because we all come from a hurting place somewhere down the line. 2 Corinthians 12:19 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." So tonight I will bring you my weaknesses and show you the power of Christ. I was born in Cuba on January 13, 1963, in the same house that my mom and grandmother had been born. My early memories are that of a happy childhood. I lived a full life in the presence of immediate family members, with aunts, uncles, my grandmother, and parents, all under the same roof. As the only child, I had all the attention and I loved it. I would read poetry, mainly Los Zapaticos de Rosa, sing and dance for them, and my family would love my performance. I loved my family so much. At the age of 6, I remember going to the hospital with my dad to meet my baby sister. And just like that, she came home to live with us. All of a sudden, I was not the center of attention to my parents. And I remember feeling extremely jealous and rejected by them. I remember picking up my belongings from the room that I shared with my parents and moving next door with my grandmother. I believe that by repressing my anger, that this was the beginning of a pattern of self-destruction that would follow me throughout most of my life. At the age of 8, I clearly remember that fateful day when the telegram arrived at our house. My grandmother and aunts started screaming and crying. There was chaos and confusion all over the house. And then I heard the words, "You're leaving to the United States." This was the worst news of my life. I would never see my family again. At that time, there were no visits to Cuba. Once a family left, they would never be able to return. A couple of weeks later, I found myself living at the Freedom Towers, then at the home of my parents' friend. We eventually settled down and started a new life. I remember writing daily letters to my grandmother and telling her how miserable I was and how much I disliked living here. I resented my parents from snatching me away from my family and blamed them for my sadness. Instead of expressing my grief and anger to my parents, I kept it all inside and learned how to pretend that everything was okay. My dad always enjoyed having his own business, and several years after arriving in the US, he opened up several restaurants and became very successful. I would go to school, and right after school, I would go to the restaurant and work there. We worked 7 days a week, and I remember how much I wanted to be like my friends who would go out after school and hang out with their friends or just go home and relax. My mom and dad were very protective of my sister and I and would not allow for us to stay home alone. As a little girl, I was extremely shy, but by coming in contact with so many people at the restaurant, I felt much more comfortable and became much more outgoing. I have asked my mom to describe me, what I was like as a little girl. And she said that I was very calm, a hardworking child, that I loved music, and that I was very sociable. I like asking her and listening to her observations about what she remembers me to be like, because I remember something completely different. I remember a girl that was bitter. I was never happy. I always felt anxious, hated school, and resented my parents for having to work every day of my life. Years passed and I became a teenager. I realized in junior high, that's how long ago it was before middle school, that if I skipped school, I could actually have fun instead of going to class. So a couple of times a week, some of my friends and I got into a car with an older friend, and we would skip school. We would go to the beach, go to Amelia Earhart Park, Westland Mall. Yes, I lived in Hialeah. For the first time in my life, I was able to be free and do the things that I always wanted to do. And better yet, not have a chaperone. At this time, I started smoking cigarettes and taking charge of my own life. I was going to do exactly what I wanted and be back in school on time for my dad to pick me up. I remember thinking that I was finally free from the oppressive life that my parents were making me live by having to be at work with them every single day. As I grew older, school became more and more dreadful to me. And in high school, I skipped more than I even attended. I really don't even know how I got C's in my report card. I never failed a course, even though I barely attended classes. My parents, on the other hand, never saw my report card or my absentee notes because I simply signed my mother's name every time they gave me one. Since they didn't speak English, I would just tell them that I didn't have anything to show them. On my 17th birthday, my father took me to a Pontiac dealership and bought me the car of my dreams, a 1980s Formula Firebird. Light blue. Now, I was finally free to do my own thing in the streets of Hialeah. How I would hang out with my friends after school, just like I had always dreamed. I soon realized that the newfound freedom that my muscle car gave me did not give me any happiness at all. I had always thought that the reason for my lack of happiness was because I did not have freedom to do what I wanted. I was sure that once I could break away from my parents and do my own thing, that then I would finally enjoy being happy, something that just never seemed to come my way. The funny thing is that on the outside, no one ever knew that I was unhappy. As I look back, I remember the extreme sadness and turmoil that I had in my heart in those years. Now I know that it was really unexpressed rage that kept me a prisoner. At the age of 18, I began to frequent discotheques before clubs. And one specific one of them became my favorite. It was Casanova's in Hialeah. People from Hialeah, stay in Hialeah. My friends and I would go every single weekend where I would go dance disco until closing. Music was an escape to my inner sadness, the sadness that I would take home with me and wake up to every morning. It was around this time, the time where I was finally free to come and go as I pleased, that dark thoughts started to brew in my brain. I distinctly remember having obsessive thoughts about death and dying. Whenever things went wrong in my life, I quickly wished that I would just die. I hated being alone and was always surrounded by many friends. I worked during the day, and right after work was done, I always had an activity planned. I was never ever home. I felt that I had to go out, have fun, go to the beach, be with my friends, because maybe, just maybe, if I did that enough, I would find the happiness that I so desperately desired. At the age of 23, I was still in the disco scene. At this time, happy hours started popping up everywhere, and I no longer had to wait until midnight to start having fun. Now my friends and I could go straight from work and have fun right away. The problem was that I was not really having much fun after all, not on the inside anyways. One day at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday night, I crossed the street from Casanova's and sat down next to Chris. Chris was the hot dog guy. I usually never spoke to him because I was usually with a big group of friends. However, on this Wednesday night, I crossed the street all by myself. Chris started talking to me about Jesus, and how Jesus had completely changed his life. I had heard about Jesus. I had even asked my mom when I was younger, and she told me, oh, he was a very good man, a prophet even. That was all I knew about Jesus. I must say that in those days, I had been thinking a lot about God. I even remember telling one of my friends as we were driving past the church, I said to her, I belong in that place. So when Chris started talking, I really paid attention, something that I would have not done previously. He invited me to a Bible study, and I loved attending. A friend of the family invited me to his church, and there I heard that Jesus had died for my sins on the cross, and that if I would invite him into my life, he would give me eternal life. I invited Jesus into my life, and the peace and joy that I experienced in the years to come was incredible. I told everyone I knew about Jesus. I stopped going to discos, which was a huge thing for me. I invited all of my friends to come to church with me. Most, however, did not. I told my parents and my sister about Jesus, and they also invited Jesus into their lives. This was great. I felt alive. I finally felt that happiness that I was looking for. This was incredible. I simply could not believe the freedom and the peace. Life just could not get any better for me at this point. It was at this time that I met my husband. He attended the same church that I did. He invited me to act in a play that he was performing and producing. And I said, I have no idea how to act, but I said yes anyways. And after almost a year of weekly practices, we realized that we had fallen in love. This was a very exciting time in my life. I was in love, I was happy, and life was great. On November 12, 1988, we were married. We were so happy, and God blessed us with our first son, Christopher. He was right in front of me. Then shortly after, we had Brandon and Tyler. With 3 beautiful boys and a wonderful husband that couldn't be here because he's working, I was sure that I would have been happily ever after. It would not be so. For you see, that love, that joy, that excitement that I had experienced when I came to know Jesus, that overwhelming satisfaction that I had in my life, that was pretty much gone. I was a living example of Matthew 13, 20 and 21 that says, the seed on the rocky soil represents those who hear the message and immediately receive it with joy. But since they don't have deep roots, they don't last long. They fall away as soon as they have problems. Yep, my roots have been very shallow in my relationship with God. I never read the Bible anymore. I stopped praying altogether. Sure, I went to church. We made sure our kids learned about God. We rounded them up every Sunday morning and always sat on our favorite spot at church. Sunday mornings from 11 to 12, that was God time. The rest of the week was for me to wallow, and wallow I did. Things in my mind went from bad to worse. I resorted to my childhood ways. When my husband or my kids disappointed me, I retreat into my own little world of sadness and darkness, all the while blaming them, storing all the bitterness in my heart as I had done with my parents in my childhood, and blaming everybody around me for my lack of happiness. In 1985, I began my career in insurance and began working outside the home. My business started to grow, and now with a second income, we began to enjoy much more financial freedom. It was at this time that we started to have frequent parties at our home. We had many friends and enjoyed having them over. I began to drink alcohol and subsequently started smoking cigarettes once again, after I had quit over 20 years before. On the outside, my life looked awesome. Parties, Disney trips on a monthly basis, incredible vacations. I should have been very happy. Instead, I was becoming more and more obsessed with death with every passing day. If anything went wrong in my life, I immediately went to that little secret place in my mind, the place where I knew that I could choose to end it all at any given time. I knew that when things became too difficult, I had the secret weapon to make it happen. After all, suicide was in my DNA. I would rationalize to myself. I had an aunt on my mother's and an aunt on my father's side that had both died from suicide. In a strange way, suicidal thoughts always comforted me and made me feel that I had control over my own destiny. When I could no longer function normally or live a day without extreme depression, I went to see a psychiatrist. She assured me that medications would take care of the way I felt. And to my pleasant surprise, it worked. After taking the medication for several weeks, I felt happy and energetic for the first time in years. I wish I could say that those feelings lasted. However, as my body became accustomed to the medications, those feelings quickly vanished. As additional pills were added, I would feel better for a little while and then once again go back to horrific darkness and despair. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Nothing was working. My cocktail of 3 different medications stopped working altogether. So I would self-medicate with alcohol to see if I could stop the sadness. I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, 2 in the weekends, and anxiety ruled my life. All of a sudden, I started to get headaches, migraines. They were so severe that I went to several neurologists and they found nothing physically wrong. Now I have constant feelings of depression, suicidal thoughts, and debilitating migraines. It was unbearable at times. I remember sleeping through the weekends, the afternoons. I would miss work because I could not physically be able to get up and get ready. Sometimes it was the migraines, other times I just didn't have the strength to face the day. My work life was affected, my family life was affected. I constantly thought about killing myself. My visits to the psychiatrist went from monthly to weekly. My medications were made stronger. My despair grew. This reminds me of Matthew 12:44. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order. Then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. I was now much worse than I had been in all of my life. In 2011, I realized that I had endured enough. I was going to take control of my situation. I was going to do what I had dreamed and secretly prepared for most of my adult life. I was going to end my pain and suffering. I was going to put an end to this dark world and take my own life. On an April morning, I went to work as usual. However, I knew that every step that I took would be my last one. I left my house, and I knew that I would never return home alive again. I got to work and typed for many hours what would be called an exit letter. In that letter, I said goodbye to everyone that was significant to my life. I said goodbye to my husband, to my children, my parents, my friends. I explained to each one that this was not a result of anything that they did, that I just could not bear living any longer, that I just needed to die. I left my office and purchased all of the items that I needed to complete my plan. I checked into a hotel, took hundreds of pills, and settled in to a comfortable bed where I would end my life. I was finally going to get the rest that my mind needed. I was finally going to do what I had dreamed of all those years. Soon there was a loud banging on the door, and a man said that the police was coming, for you see, my secretary had noticed something wrong. She went into the computer and found the exit letter. She knew the password to my accounts and saw that I was at Hotel Sofitel. Within minutes, the police and my entire office was in my hotel room. My best friend included was sitting right there. I was rushed to the hospital where they pumped my stomach and placed me in ICU. They told my husband that they did not know if I was going to make it through the night. After a week in ICU, I was released from the hospital, Baker acted, and sent to a mental hospital. After my release, I went home. It was odd. My husband was scared that I would try to do this again. My kids, my parents, my co-workers, my friends, everyone was very concerned. I blamed my co-workers for not allowing me to die in peace. I was very upset with all of them and did not even want to talk to them. Days turned into months, and I was still walking around in the same exact depression, still visiting my doctor weekly, still wishing to die. We left our more traditional church and started attending Calvary. I remember falling asleep at most services. I just could not stay awake. My migraines were crippling, my depression debilitating. Then I remember the day when I simply looked up to heaven and I told God some very simple words. I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I cannot live my life without you, Lord. Please forgive me. Please take control of my life. I need you, God. I remember that right after saying this simple prayer to God, I felt a lightness about me that I had not experienced before. I felt that I had taken millions of pounds off my shoulders. I felt light and airy all of a sudden. I did not feel gloomy or even sad. The veil of death that had tortured my soul for so many years was lifted. The one that the devil himself tried to destroy me with. The veil was removed from my life by Jesus. In 1 John 4:4 it says, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. That very Sunday, I walked into church and hung on to every single word that Pastor Pedro said. Everything that he spoke about was as if he was saying specifically to me. I was refreshed and rejuvenated. I started to read my old dusty Bible and to actually have conversations with God. I told God about all my disappointments, my repressed anger, and began a relationship with him that little by little has grown into the most beautiful relationship. My husband had heard Alan's testimony and encouraged me to come to celebrate recovery. I did not think that a recovery group would be for me, but I came anyways. I walked into the cafe, sat in the back with my friend, and cried the entire meeting. I continued to come, and I continued my walk with the Lord. One day I realized that I had not had a migraine for months, and when I did the math, it had been many months. I stopped taking 3 and 4 hour naps, and I was going to work every day feeling energized and invigorated. I was walking daily in the power and the light of Christ himself. Matthew 4:16 says, the people living in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the dead, let me read it again. The people living in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. Well, I can assure you that those verses were in the Bible specifically for me. I, who once walked in darkness, had seen a great light, and I was never going to let go of that great light again. I now know the value of a relationship with God, And I know that this treasure cannot be taken for granted. There are some steps that I have taken to protect the treasure of sanity that I have found. I make sure that I have a healthy and growing relationship with God. I prioritize my time with Him by spending time in prayer and by reading the Bible daily. I also protect my mind by not watching images that I know will end up disturbing me later. I used to watch marathons of shows like 48 Hours, any murder show that was real. I've eliminated all of those from my life. I play worship music all day and sing praises to my God. I place myself in situations that allow my relationship with God to grow and have developed deep bonds with brothers and sisters who also love God passionately. I completed the 12 steps last year, and these steps were life-changing for me. Celebrate Recovery has been instrumental to my life. The tools that I learned and continue to learn at Celebrate Recovery are essential. Realizing that I needed to take responsibility for my actions and stop blaming those around me for my misery was very hard for me to face. However, after forgiving myself and learning how to react in a healthy way, I was liberated from any self-condemnation. Celebrate Recovery is truly a program that really works. This program has taught me to get to the root of my deep-rooted depression. Each step of the program gave me newfound freedom. Working these steps alongside amazing women who are now my sisters is an enjoyable process because I did not have to do it alone. I had the support of my sponsor and of each one of the ladies in my 12-step group. By learning that I can't keep hurts bottled up and that I need to forgive and move on, I have been able to live free from bottled up anger, anxiety, and ultimately suicidal depression. I learned that life will bring disappointments and hard blows. They continue to come. However, by taking responsibility for my actions and for my thoughts, I can handle those storms with a different perspective. I no longer wake up and dwell on my feelings. I wake up and thank the Lord for another day, for a new opportunity to serve Him. I thank God for my family and friends. Now when I am hurting, I look at the whole picture and keep in mind that God ultimately is in control of my situation. Since my relationship with God is strong, and since I trust that He is taking care of every single detail in my life, I know that I am in good hands and that I don't have to fear anything. I surrender every single day, every single area of my life to God. Every fear, every disappointment, every sorrow, I have placed each one of these as love offerings on His feet. I confess on a daily basis my weaknesses and my inability to be able to live one single moment without Him. I can't live one moment without His light guiding my path. I am aware of these verses in 1 Peter 5:8 through 14. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him. Stand firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will Himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. To Him be the power and the glory forever. In the process of my recovery, I have received a treasure more precious than words can ever describe. I have received joy, the joy that I have always longed for. I have received peace, the peace that on my own I was never able to achieve. Today I am able to enjoy the very simple pleasures of life alongside my family and friends. A sunset, A day at our beloved Everglades National Park. A Tuesday night with my amazing Connect Group family. Night drives, packing our Previa van with my husband, sons, and our dogs. Going camping. I would really be here all night if I were to tell you all the wonderful activities that I get to enjoy on a regular basis. Today, I stand before you, a sane woman, a woman that is living her God-given purpose. I can truly say for the first time in my life, in my entire life, that I am happy to be alive. Thank you for letting me.